This week on the Inside Story, U.S. President Joe Biden calls it quits as he announces he will no longer seek a second term in the White House. The head of the Secret Service resigns one day after a bipartisan beating in Congress over the failed assassination attempt on former President Trump. Plus, a global computer outage, and Russia jails 2 American journalists in a trial widely viewed as a sham. Now, on the Inside Story, Biden ends his re-election bid.
Hi, I'm VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell. It's hard to overstate the political importance of the last 2 weeks in American politics. Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt on Saturday, July 13th. Less than 10 days later, President Joe Biden announced he would not run for re-election. Biden instead endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic Party's candidate to face Trump in November. Biden discussed his decision and his hopes for the future of the party and the country in an address to the nation on Wednesday.
U.S. President Joe Biden made the stunning decision to exit the presidential race from behind a screen, choosing to drop the news online. 3 days later, in an Oval Office speech that was at times hopeful, at times determined, and at times wistful, he explained why. Biden spoke of his 5 decades in public office, touted his presidential record of domestic and political achievements, but then called for energetic new leadership to face tomorrow's challenges.
But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation. You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now.
Biden also thanked Vice President Kamala Harris, who was taken to the campaign trail with his endorsement and enough delegate pledges to net the nomination. He described her as experienced, tough, and capable, but added, "The choice is up to you." He did not name-check the Republican in the race. But analysts say Biden's stark warnings all point to one man.
He talked about polarization. He talked about violence and political violence. Those are all things that harken back to Donald Trump and his presidency. He talked about the threats facing the nation when he first took office, January 2021. And so that was certainly about Donald Trump. But yeah, this wasn't a place for him to talk about Donald Trump. It wasn't a place for him to give a campaign speech.
The president said his job will now focus on domestic challenges like civil rights and voter freedom, gun safety reforms, the quest to end cancer, and Supreme Court reform. He also cited myriad challenges the U.S. faces abroad, with wars raging in Gaza and Ukraine, and China becoming more emboldened in the Indo-Pacific. These foreign fires, analysts say, are likely to burn in the minds of concerned voters.
That's really the concern I think people will have, is how does a lame duck president deal with foreign policy crises?
But for the final act of this presidency, Biden remains the protagonist on America's biggest stage.
He's like an athlete that is going to make the Hall of Fame and is retiring and, gets the cheers from the crowds. Finally, for a long 50-year tremendous career.
Biden clearly understood that this address would be a dramatic peak. So he used his final words to break the fourth wall with a message as old as America.
The great thing about America is here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do. History is in your hands. The power is in your hands. The idea of America lies in your hands.
After Biden's announcement on Sunday, there were some discussions among pundits and Democratic leaders about who would replace him. But Biden quickly endorsed his Vice President, Harris. and many heavy hitters in the Democratic Party fell in line and endorsed her too. VOA's Carolyn Presutti has more about the life of Kamala Harris, who has already made history as the first Black and Asian vice president, as well as the first woman to hold the office, and who now could become America's first female president.
Please raise your right hand and repeat.
A history-making moment in the United States in 2021.
So help me God.
As former Senator Kamala Harris became the nation's first female vice president.
It is my honor to be here, to stand on the shoulders of those who came before.
Harris is also the first Black American and Indian American to serve in the nation's second highest job.
She's broken so many glass ceilings for so many women.
The daughter of an Indian mother and a Jamaican father, Harris was born in Oakland, California. A mural of her appears at the school she was bused to as a child, as part of racial integration efforts. A graduate of Howard University, Harris became the first female district attorney in San Francisco in 2004. And then in 2011, the first Black woman to serve as California's Attorney General. During her years as vice president, Harris has been vocal about the U.S. Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade, a 1973 decision that had made abortion legal nationwide. During his term, former President Donald Trump appointed 3 conservative justices to the High Court.
He uses the word proudly, takes credit for overturning Roe. So make no mistake, if Trump gets the chance, he will sign a national abortion ban to outlaw abortion in every single state.
The vice president also applauds continuation of the Affordable Care Act and the reduced price of insulin achieved by the Biden administration.
Raise your hand if you have a family member with diabetes.
Early on, she was tapped to lead the administration's efforts at the border. But the Biden campaign ended up on defense, with immigration a key issue in the 2024 election.
Now, undocumented spouses of American citizens who have been in the country for 10 or more years can stay in the country while they apply for a green card.
Speaking to pro-immigrant groups like the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders, she quickly turns the focus to Donald Trump's words.
That someone who vilifies immigrants, who promotes xenophobia, someone who stokes hate, should never again have the chance to stand behind a microphone and the seal of the President of the United States.
Harris has become more present at rallies like these on the campaign trail after President Joe Biden's stumbling performance in the June debate with former President Donald Trump.
We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again, period.
With President Biden's withdrawal from the race on Sunday, if Harris is nominated, she would again make history as the first Black and Indian American woman to run for the nation's highest office.
God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Carolyn Presutti, VOA News.
Political pundits for weeks predicted Biden's historic withdrawal from the race. But beyond TV's selection of partisan talking heads, what do voters think? VOA correspondent Scott Stearns reports on reactions to the shifting political landscape.
In Joe Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, voter Eric Boylan says Democrats had little choice but to push Biden out.
I think he was a very good leader, but I do kind of also agree that his time has come and it's time to step aside and let somebody rise up within those ranks.
Voter Christine Stoll says if Biden is unfit to be a candidate, he should step down as president.
He should have dropped out a long time ago. He never should. He should leave the White House. He is not mentally stable enough to run this country.
Making Vice President Kamala Harris the nominee improves the party's chances against Republican candidate Donald Trump, says voter Daniel Brennan.
Harris polls well against Trump, so I think she has a real shot at winning. And I think he's doing the right thing right now, despite some people being so nervous and saying it's disastrous.
On a visit to Washington, Pennsylvania voter Bill Mills says Harris shares responsibility for Biden's economic failures.
We're noticing an increase in the price of groceries and fuel and the price of living, and our lives are worse now. And Vice President Harris is riding on those coattails. So it's going to be very hard to shake that opinion when we have all witnessed an economic downturn in all of our lives.
In Michigan, voter Jason Potts says the switch gives the Democratic Party a chance to connect with younger voters.
I always thought we're just biding time until someone a little more tenacious comes along, and we'll see if that's Kamala. She's got more fire, definitely. And
as Vice President Harris worked on controlling illegal immigration, Florida voter Christopher Rangill says her failure at the border makes her unqualified to be president.
Kamala's garbage. She's worse than Joe. Or they on the same page. They're about the same. But I don't think anybody's going to vote for Kamala. No one wants to back her. She had one job. That was handling the border.
In Washington, voter Alicia Jefferson hopes people do not see the vice president only as a woman of color, but look to her accomplishments.
And I hope they can look past anything else and look at that. But the world we live in, that some people will and some won't. And I hope it's not enough people that stand away or use that as an obstacle for her to get in office.
New Yorker Andrew Varshavsky says it will be tough for anyone to beat Trump.
Even if Biden were to stay in the race, or whoever we have right now as a Democrat, that it's Trump's race to lose. So I'm a Democrat, I think it's going to be hard for us to win this race, no matter what happens now.
Harris appears to have enough commitments from party delegates to be the nominee, but it will take next month's Democratic National Convention in Chicago to make her the party's official candidate to challenge Trump. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
And on Wednesday in Washington, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed a joint meeting at the United States Congress. Presiding over the visit was Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson and Democratic Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland, stepping in for Vice President Harris as she worked the campaign trail. Cardin, an Orthodox Jew, has long been a staunch congressional ally of Israel, but his party's base seems to be shifting away from blind support, considering Israel's ongoing assault on Palestinian territories. And some lawmakers even skipped the event.
For the first time since the October 7th Hamas attack that left 1,200 Israelis dead and some 240 hostages captured, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed U.S. lawmakers in person Wednesday.
It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
Calling anti-Semitism the world's oldest hatred, Netanyahu spoke directly to protesters.
When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots.
Gaza's health ministry, which does not distinguish civilians from combatants, says more than 39,000 Palestinians have died since the beginning of hostilities. Netanyahu addressed the International Criminal Court's allegations of Israeli war crimes.
Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of deliberately starving the people of Gaza. This is utter, complete nonsense.
Several high-profile Democrats, including Vice President Kamala Harris and former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, did not attend the speech. Senator Jack Reed, who serves on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, explained his reasons for boycotting on Tuesday.
Netanyahu's made common cause with far-right extremists who pursue their own agendas at the expense of Israel's security. These extremists have been elevated to some of the highest cabinet positions in the government and have encouraged Netanyahu's most misguided policies.
Netanyahu was welcomed by congressional Democratic and Republican leadership Wednesday.
This is a very important time. Our bipartisan congressional leadership recognized it as such and invited him here because our dear ally Israel is in an existential fight for its very existence, and that fight extends to every one of its borders.
Some families of Israeli hostages protested the speech, calling on Netanyahu to agree to a U.S. proposed ceasefire. He outlined his own vision for a post-war Middle East.
The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there.
Netanyahu's address is key to maintaining U.S. support for Israel, but comes at a time when domestic American politics is taking center stage.
He is going to be trying to at least halt an erosion in support among Democrats and try to build credit with Republicans who he assesses are much more likely to be in power after the November elections.
Netanyahu is set to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Harris, as well as former President Donald Trump, later this week. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
U.S. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle has announced her decision to step down following this month's failed assassination attempt on former president and leading Republican candidate Donald Trump. Before her decision, she went in front of the Senate and faced a day of withering criticism. We go back to VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson, who has more on security concerns during the upcoming election season.
9 days after the assassination attempt that shook the nation, there are few answers on how the shooter got so close to Trump. The head of the United States Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle, answering lawmakers' questions about the shooting for the first time, was blunt.
We failed.
Cheadle said a full report on the agency's failure to protect the former president would be released within 90 days. Lawmakers said that was unacceptable during an election season that has already proved to be contentious. Some called on her to resign.
The Secret Service has a zero-fail mission, but it failed on July 13th and in the days leading up to the rally. The Secret Service has thousands of employees and a significant budget, but it has now become the face of incompetence.
Cheadle told lawmakers Trump's Secret Service detail was aware of a suspicious person before the former president spoke at the rally.
If the detail had been passed information that there was a threat, the detail would never have brought the former president out onto stage.
One analyst told VOA the early warnings about the shooter raised serious questions.
Most definitely there was a failure here to neutralize the threat when it was immediately observed. And quite frankly, it would have been a legitimate to shoot that young man once he was on the roof. It would have been a legitimate shooting, a legal shooting. So I don't know why there was hesitation.
Congressional Democrats called for changes to gun laws in the United States, saying it was unfortunate that former President Trump is now one of many victims of gun violence.
We almost lost a presidential candidate the other day. A 20-year-old had access to his father's AR-15 and got on top of a roof within 500 yards or feet of the podium. And I'm asking you, did the availability of that AR-15, which is replicated all across America, make your job harder or easier? And you're not willing to answer that question?
The Federal Bureau of Investigation has still not determined a motive for the actions of Thomas Matthew Crooks, the suspected shooter. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
Experts say last week's global disruption of computer operating systems highlights the vulnerability of a digital world dependent on just a few providers for key computing services. At the center is cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike, a computer services firm that provides security to nearly 25% of the world's companies. A single glitchy line of code crashed any Windows-based machine that downloaded the update. The company caught the problem and issued a fix, but not before the bad code had affected millions of Windows users. A significant number of the millions of computers that crashed on Friday are back in operation, but not all of them. From hospitals to airports, banks, businesses, and even news outlets. To understand what happened, we spoke to computer expert Vahid Bejadan, an assistant professor of computer science at the University of New Haven.
It appears that many of the organizations that were affected did not have the means or the strategy to test out the update as it was being rolled out. Typically when a new software patch or the software update comes in, at least in critical infrastructure, it's the policy of the IT department or the IT staff to first test out the update on an isolated machine. If everything goes according to the plan, they roll it out to other machines. If not, they contain the update to that one machine and wait for further updates or instructions from the vendor. That doesn't seem to be what's happened in many of the organizations that were affected by this faulty update.
In separate hearings Friday, July 19th, Russia convicted 2 American journalists in cases widely viewed as sham trials. Here's VOA Press Freedom editor Jessica Jarrett, who's been closely monitoring events.
Thanks, Anita. 2 closed-door trials hundreds of kilometers apart and one outcome. Russia has convicted 2 American journalists, Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal and Alsu Kamasheva, who works for our sister network, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. In Gershkovich's case, it marks the first time that Russia has convicted a journalist of espionage since the Cold War. The US and media watchdogs have condemned the actions as politically motivated and a sham. In a closed-door trial Friday, Alsu Kamasheva received a 6.5-year sentence for spreading what the Kremlin says is false information about the Russian army. The verdict appears linked to a book Kamasheva helped edit about Russians opposed to the war in Ukraine. It is unclear if other charges are still pending against the journalist for VOA's sister network, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. RFERL President Stephen Capus called the trial a, quote, mockery of justice. Media groups are condemning Russia's actions.
But this just shows again how these trials against these 2 American journalists, this one a Russian-American journalist in Russia, are obviously completely manipulated by Russian authorities.
Kamasheva's verdict came the same day Russia convicted Evan Gershkovich. The Wall Street Journal reporter was sentenced to 16 years in prison on espionage charges that he denies. The US is demanding both Americans be released.
We remain focused on the case of Alsu Kamasheva. She's a dedicated journalist who is being targeted by Russian authorities for her uncompromising commitment to speaking the truth and her principled reporting.
The convictions mark a rapid decline in media freedoms in Russia. The country ranks near the bottom of the World Press Freedom Index. And Moscow is detaining at least 22 journalists, more than half of whom are foreign nationals, says the Committee to Protect Journalists. RFERL External Affairs Chief Diane Zeleny says Kamasheva's unjust detention and the risks for its journalists are a daily concern.
It is the new normal. It's sad to say. This is sort of the state of the world right now. Journalists are not safe anymore in many places, and the ways to help them are minimal, actually, and they are being targeted by authoritarian governments.
Kamasheva's family in Prague says her detention hits at a personal level.
It would be one thing if she was only away from me for so long, but to know that she's in an unsafe place and that she's in danger and she's not comfortable, that's something that really makes me sad.
The Russian embassy did not respond to VOA's requests for comment. But in the case of Gershkovich, the Kremlin has indicated it would be open to a prisoner swap. With Liam Scott in Prague and Christina Caseda-Smith in Washington, Jessica Jarrett, VOA News.
That's all for now. Thanks for watching. For the latest news, you can log on to voanews.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. For the latest news, follow me on X at 6ArmsPowell. Also, catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. I'm VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell. We'll see you next week for The Inside Story.